The pain shot through Julia's ankle like a sharp blade. She was coming down the stairs of the modest two-story house in Lincoln Park, on the north side of Chicago, when her foot slipped on the last step. The scream she let out echoed through the entire house, causing her grandmother Teresa to drop the pot on the stove and run to the living room. It was 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night, and Julia's world collapsed in that instant. Not because of the physical pain throbbing in her leg, but because of what that accident meant. Tomorrow was the most important day of her professional life. The interview at Miles Tech, the most coveted tech company in the country, was scheduled for 9 in the morning. There was no way to reschedule. Everyone knew that Raphael Miles, the company's CEO, did not accept excuses, postponements, or second chances. It was now or never. Teresa knelt beside her granddaughter, her 68 years weighing on her cracking knees, but her concern was entirely focused on the 24-year-old woman crying on the floor. Julia's ankle was already beginning to swell, purple and hot to the touch. Teresa had seen enough injuries in her life to know this was no small thing. She had raised 3 daughters alone after her husband abandoned her when the youngest was still nursing. She knew pain, she knew overcoming adversity, but most of all, she knew the value of an opportunity, and she was not going to let her granddaughter lose hers. At the emergency room of the nearest hospital, the diagnosis came 2 hours later. A severe sprain, absolute rest for at least a week, complete immobilization. Julia sat on the gurney, her face pale not only from the pain but from the despair consuming every fiber of her being. She had spent months preparing her portfolio, studying Miles Tech, rehearsing answers to possible questions. That senior developer position was perfect for her. Excellent salary, unparalleled benefits, and the chance to work with the best professionals in the field. But Raphael Miles was known for his inflexibility. He conducted the final interviews himself and had a clear rule that no recruiter dared to break. If a candidate did not show up at the scheduled time, for any reason whatsoever, they were automatically disqualified, no exceptions, no explanations. The next person on the list took their place. Back home it was already past midnight. Julia was lying on the sofa, her leg elevated on pillows, an ice pack on her bandaged ankle. Teresa was making chamomile tea in the kitchen, but her mind was working at a different speed. She watched her granddaughter through the half-open door, saw the silent tears streaming down the young face, and something inside her stirred. It was the same feeling she had when her daughters were little and she had to decide between paying the rent or buying medicine. Between having pride or asking for help, between giving up or fighting. One more day. The idea struck like lightning, absurd and brilliant at the same time. Teresa looked at the wall clock. 6 hours until the interview. She walked into the living room and sat in the armchair opposite her granddaughter. "Julia, my girl, listen to me carefully," Teresa said with that firm voice she used when she had made an irrevocable decision. Julia raised her red eyes. "You're going to give me everything you prepared for the interview. All the material, the entire portfolio, all the information, and you're going to tell me exactly what you plan to say." The young woman frowned, confused. "Grandma, I don't understand." Teresa leaned forward. "I'm going in your place tomorrow morning." The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Julia blinked several times, as if she hadn't heard correctly. "Grandma, you're tired. It must be the stress of the night." "No, my child, I'm being very serious. I'm going to that fancy building. I'm going up to the office of this Raphael Miles, and I'm going to deliver all your work." Teresa's voice didn't waver for a second. Julia tried to sit up, but the pain stopped her. "That's crazy, Grandma. They'll never accept it. They'll stop me at the reception desk. And if they do let me in, they'll kick me out as soon as they realize I'm not you." Teresa crossed her arms. "Maybe so, maybe not. But I'd rather try and fail than let you lose this chance without even fighting." Julia opened her mouth to protest again, but something in her grandmother's eyes silenced her. It was that same determined look she saw when Teresa told stories about the difficult years, about how she worked as a cleaner, a cook, a seamstress, all at the same time to ensure her 3 daughters had food on the table and a roof over their heads. It was the look of a woman who had faced storms and come out standing on the other side. "Grandma, they'll humiliate you," Julia whispered, her voice breaking. I don't care. I've been humiliated for worse things and by people worth far less. If there's a chance, however small, to save this opportunity for you, I'm going to grab it with both hands. The next few hours were a whirlwind. Julia, still incredulous but touched by her grandmother's courage, began to pass on all the information. She showed her the digital portfolio she had assembled, explaining each project, every important line of code, every technical decision she had made. Teresa jotted everything down in an old notebook, her small, neat handwriting filling page after page. She didn't understand half of the technical terms, but that didn't matter. She wasn't the one who needed to impress the CEO with her programming knowledge. She just needed to get there, explain the situation, and deliver her granddaughter's work. When the sun began to rise over Chicago, painting the sky orange and pink, Teresa was dressed in her best clothes. A pair of black dress pants she had bought on sale years ago, a white long-sleeved blouse, and a navy blue blazer that had belonged to her eldest daughter. She had styled her white hair into an elegant bun and even put on a little lipstick. Looking at herself in the mirror, she saw a 68-year-old woman with wrinkles that told stories of struggle, hands calloused from hard work, but eyes shining with determination. Julia was leaning on crutches in the bedroom doorway, still pale, still scared, but there was something else in her face now. Admiration. The Miles Tech building was on Wacker Drive in the financial heart of Chicago. Teresa took 2 buses and the L train to get there. When she got off at the station, it was 8:40 in the morning, 20 minutes until the interview. She walked through the bustling streets, her heart beating faster with every step. It wasn't exactly fear. It was that feeling of being about to jump off a cliff without knowing if there was water or rocks below. But Teresa had always jumped. She always trusted that somehow she would find a way to survive the impact. The building was glass and steel, soaring into the sky like a shining spear. In the lobby, marble reflected soft lights, and a vertical garden covered an entire wall. Everything there screamed luxury, power, money. Teresa felt small for a moment, but then she thought of her granddaughter at home, of the pain in her ankle, of the silent tears, and her shoulders straightened. She walked to the reception desk with the posture of a queen. "Good morning," she said to the receptionist, a young woman of no more than 25 in an impeccable suit. "I have an interview with Mr. Raphael Miles at 9 o'clock. The name is Julia Stevens." The receptionist looked at her computer screen, then at Teresa, then back at the screen. Her expression was one of total confusion. "Ma'am, are you the candidate, Julia Stevens?" Teresa swallowed hard but kept her voice steady. "Yes, that's me. Well, not exactly. But I can explain everything to Mr. Miles if you could just let me go up." The young woman seemed genuinely lost. She looked around as if seeking help, but the lobby was almost empty at that time of morning. "Look, ma'am," the receptionist began, her voice low and hesitant, "I really don't know if I can do that. Mr. Miles is very strict about schedules and procedures. If I let you go up and he gets angry, I could lose my job." Teresa placed her hands on the granite counter and leaned forward slightly. Her gaze met the receptionist's, and there was something in it that was impossible to ignore. "My dear, I understand your position, but my granddaughter, the real Julia Stevens, is at home with a sprained ankle. She spent months preparing for this interview. This job is her dream, and that man upstairs, as powerful as he may be, doesn't allow rescheduling. So I came all the way here, took buses and the L train across the entire city to try and save her opportunity. Now you can stop me here, and I'll leave in peace. But every time you look at that elevator, you'll wonder what would have happened if you'd let a grandmother fight for her granddaughter. You'll wonder if a little bit of your courage could have changed someone's life, and you'll carry that doubt forever." The receptionist was silent for several long seconds. Then, almost in disbelief at what she was doing, she typed something into the computer and picked up a visitor's badge. 23rd floor, she said, her voice trembling slightly. "His office is at the end of the hall." Teresa took the badge and smiled. "You're a good person. You won't regret this." As she walked to the elevator, Teresa felt her legs tremble for the first time. What was she doing? This was insanity. But it was too late to turn back now. The elevator doors closed, and she began to ascend, up, 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 toward an encounter that would change everything. The 23rd floor of Miles Tech was even more impressive than the lobby. Glass walls offered a panoramic view of Chicago, the city stretching as far as the eye could see. The hallway was wide, with light wood floors and recessed lighting that created an atmosphere that was both modern and welcoming. But Teresa barely registered the decor. Her heart was beating so hard she could hear it in her own ears. Each step toward the end of the hall felt heavier than the last. What would she say? How would she explain? What if he threw her out before she could even open her mouth? The door to Raphael Miles's office was dark wood with brushed metal accents. There was a discreet plaque with his name and title. Teresa stopped in front of the door, took 3 deep breaths, and then knocked. "Come in," said a masculine voice from the other side, deep and authoritative. She turned the handle and entered. The office was enormous, with a glass executive desk in the center, shelves filled with books and awards, and that same breathtaking view of the city. But what captured Teresa's attention was the man behind the desk. Raphael Miles was 35, with dark hair combed, back, intense brown eyes, and a posture that radiated confidence and power. He wore an impeccable grey suit and was reviewing some papers when she entered. As he looked up and saw her, his expression instantly shifted from concentration to complete perplexity. He was silent for several seconds, just observing Teresa standing at the entrance. Then he closed the folder in front of him and leaned back in his chair. "There must be some mistake," he said, his voice controlled but clearly confused. "I'm expecting a candidate named Julia Stevens for a senior developer interview. You must have the wrong room." Teresa took a few more steps into the office, clutching her purse with both hands in front of her. "There's no mistake, Mr. Miles. I came intentionally. My name is Teresa Stevens, and Julia is my granddaughter." Raphael frowned, and for the first time, a shadow of irritation crossed his face. "So Miss Stevens decided not to show up and sent you in her place? This is absolutely unacceptable. I make it very clear that I do not accept substitutes or rescheduling." "No," Teresa interrupted, her voice firmer now. "She didn't send me. I came on my own." Raphael stood up, his abrupt movements revealing growing frustration. He was tall, must have been 6'1", and his intimidating physical presence was clearly something he used to his advantage in negotiations. "With all due respect, ma'am, I don't have time for this. If your granddaughter can't make it, then the position goes to the next candidate. That's how it works. She needs to learn that. In the professional world, there's no room for excuses." He was already reaching for the phone to call security when Teresa spoke, and there was something in her voice that made him pause. "My granddaughter sprained her ankle last night. She's at home, immobilized, unable to walk. She cried all night because she knew you wouldn't reschedule. And she was right, wasn't she?" Raphael slowly lowered the phone, but his expression remained closed. "And that changes anything? Accidents happen. She should have been more careful." Teresa took another step forward. "You're right. Accidents happen. And when they do, they reveal people's character. Julia could have just given up, accepted defeat. But she didn't, and neither did I. Because life taught me that when you really want something, when something really matters, you don't give up. You find a way." She opened her purse and took out a folder. "I brought my granddaughter's complete portfolio, every project she's developed, every important line of code, every professional achievement. It's all here. I don't expect you to hire her based on what I say, but I do expect you to at least look at her work before you throw her off the list." Raphael stood there, clearly torn. Part of him wanted to maintain his inflexible rule, send this elderly woman away, and get on with his schedule. But there was something about the whole situation that bothered him, in a way he couldn't name. He extended his hand and took the folder Teresa offered. He opened it and began to flip through. Page after page of elegant code, well-documented projects, creative solutions to complex problems. He was enough of an expert to recognize talent when he saw it, and this was exceptionally high-quality work. After a few minutes, he closed the folder and looked at Teresa again. "It's a good portfolio," he admitted, "but that doesn't change the fact that she's not here. And I can't break my own rules. If I make an exception for her, I'll..." Have to make one for everyone. Teresa nodded slowly. I understand your position, Mr. Miles. Rules are important. Consistency is important. But do you know what I think is even more important? Knowing when a rule needs to bend to humanity. Because at the end of the day, you're not hiring a robot. You're hiring a person. And people have families. They have grandmothers who love them so much, they'll cross the entire city to fight for them. The words hit Raphael like a punch to the gut. He sat down again, suddenly feeling his legs go weak. There was something in that woman's speech that had touched a wound he kept carefully hidden. My grandmother, he whispered, almost to himself. Teresa tilted her head. Did you say something, sir? Raphael looked up, and for the first time since she had entered, his mask of the ruthless CEO had visible cracks. My grandmother, he repeated louder this time. She raised me. My parents worked too much, traveled constantly. When I was 7, they basically left me with her in a simple house in rural Indiana while they chased careers and money. He paused, his voice growing rougher. She was a seamstress. Worked from home, made custom clothes for people in town. She didn't earn much, but there was always food on the table. There was always a hug when I came home from school. And she would have done exactly what you're doing right now. She would have crossed the entire world if it was to help me. The words poured out of Raphael like water from a broken dam, and Teresa realized this powerful man was revealing something he probably never shared with anyone. She passed away 5 years ago, Raphael continued, looking out the window but clearly seeing something much more distant than the city outside. I was in a business meeting in New York when I got the call. She had a heart problem and didn't make it. I didn't get there in time to say goodbye. I was too busy building this empire, proving to my absent parents that I could be more successful than them. And in the process, I forgot to call her. I forgot to visit her. I forgot what really mattered. He turned back to Teresa, and his eyes were moist. Then you walk in here and remind me of everything I've been trying not to feel for 5 years. You remind me that behind every resume, every name on a list, there's a person. There's a story. There's someone who loves that person. Teresa felt her own tears threatening to fall, but maintained her composure. Mr. Miles, your grandmother wouldn't want you to carry this guilt. She would be proud of everything you've accomplished, but maybe, just maybe, she would also want you to remember that success isn't just measured in numbers and achievements. It's also measured in how we treat people along the way. Raphael ran a hand over his face, discreetly wiping his eyes. He was silent for a long moment, and Teresa respected that silence. When he finally spoke again, his voice had a different quality, softer, more human. I'm going to do something I've never done before, he said. I'm going to break my own rule, but on one condition. Teresa waited, her heart racing. You'll interview my granddaughter? I will, Raphael confirmed, but I want you to be present as well. I want to meet the person who was raised by someone with your courage and determination. If your granddaughter has half of your strength of character, she'll fit in perfectly here. Teresa felt the tears finally stream down her face. She didn't try to hide them. Thank you, Mr. Miles. You won't regret it. Raphael shook his head. Something tells me I won't, but I have to warn you, the interview will be rigorous. The fact that I'm making an exception for her attendance doesn't mean I'm lowering my technical standards. If she's not good enough, she won't be hired. That's fair, Teresa replied. My granddaughter doesn't want favors, she wants a fair chance, and that's exactly what you're offering. Raphael picked up his calendar and opened it. We can do it next week. That gives her ankle some time to heal. Let's say Wednesday, 7 days from now, same time. He jotted something down and then looked up again. You can give your contact information to my secretary on your way out. She'll confirm all the details with you. Teresa nodded and stood up, putting the empty folder back in her purse. When she was almost at the door, Raphael called her again. Mrs. Stevens, she turned. Thank you for coming. Thank you for reminding me of what I had forgotten. She smiled, a tired but genuine smile. Sometimes God puts the right people in the right places at the right time. I think today I needed to be here just as much as you needed me to be. When Teresa left the building, it was past 10 in the morning. Chicago continued its frantic pace, millions of people rushing from one place to another, each with their own battles and dreams. She took the L train back, then the 2 buses, and when she finally opened the door to her house, Julia was exactly where she had left her, on the sofa, with her leg elevated. Her granddaughter looked at her with a mixture of hope and fear. "So?" she managed to ask, her voice trembling. Teresa let her purse drop to the floor, walked to the sofa, and hugged her granddaughter tightly. "You have an interview next Wednesday, my child, and he wants me to come along." Julia started to cry, clinging to her grandmother as if she were a lifeboat in a stormy ocean. "Grandma, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to thank me," Teresa whispered, stroking her granddaughter's hair. "This is what we do for the ones we love. We fight." The week that followed was a roller coaster of emotions and intense preparation. Julia spent every day studying even more, refining her answers, reviewing code and projects. Her ankle was better. It still hurt and she still limped noticeably, but she could walk with a cane. Teresa watched her granddaughter with a mix of pride and concern. She saw the young woman wake up at 5 in the morning to study, saw the dark circles under her eyes deepening, saw the anxiety growing with each passing day. On Tuesday night, the eve of the interview, Teresa sat beside Julia on the bed. "My child, you need to rest." Julia looked at her grandmother with tired eyes. "Grandma, I can't waste this chance. Mr. Miles is already making a huge exception. I have to be perfect." Teresa took her granddaughter's hands in hers. "You don't have to be perfect. You have to be you, authentic, human." That's what touched him when I was there. It wasn't technical skill or perfection. It was truth. It was heart. Julia took a deep breath, feeling her grandmother's words calm some of the storm inside her. "You think I can do it?" "I know you can," Teresa answered firmly, "and I'll be right there with you." That night, for the first time all week, Julia slept well. On Wednesday morning, they both got ready with care. Julia wore a navy blue suit, tied her brown hair back in a professional ponytail, and applied discreet makeup. Teresa wore the same blazer as the first time, but this time she felt different. She was no longer going as a desperate warrior. She was going as a witness to her granddaughter's triumph. They arrived at Miles Tech 15 minutes early. The same receptionist from the week before was there. And when she saw Teresa, her eyes lit up. "You did it," she exclaimed softly, clearly moved. Teresa smiled. "Not yet, but we're going to try." The young woman looked at Julia, noticing the cane and the slight limp. "Good luck. Mr. Miles is demanding, but if you're anything like your grandmother, you'll knock it out of the park." Julia thanked her, touched by the kindness. In the elevator, as they ascended, she looked at her grandmother. "Grandma, you really impressed everyone here. What did you say to him?" Teresa smiled mysteriously. "I just reminded him of things he had forgotten." This time, when they entered the office, Raphael Miles was already waiting for them. He was standing beside his desk, and his expression was serious but not hostile. "Miss Stevens," he greeted Julia, extending his hand. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." Julia shook his hand, noticing the firm but not crushing grip. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Miles, and thank you for the second chance." Raphael gestured to the chairs in front of his desk. "Please have a seat." He returned to his chair and opened Julia's portfolio. "I've spent the entire week reviewing your work," he began. "It's impressive. Your solutions for scalability problems show innovative thinking. Your code is clean and well documented. Technically, you're at the top of the candidate list." Julia felt a wave of relief, but Raphael held up a hand. "But I don't hire based on technical skill alone." He leaned back in his chair, fingers interlaced on the desk. "Tell me, Miss Stevens, what is more important in a software project? The people or the code?" Julia didn't hesitate. "The people, without a doubt." Raphael raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. Most candidates say both are equally important, trying to please me. Why do you think it's the people?" Julia glanced at her grandmother for a brief second, then looked back at Raphael. "Because code can be rewritten, refactored, improved. But if the people behind the code don't communicate well, if they don't trust each other, if they don't understand who they're building it for, then it doesn't matter how elegant the code is. The project will fail. I learned that from watching my grandmother. She raised 3 daughters alone, not because she had the best resources or the best plan. She succeeded because she put people first, always. And I try to bring that philosophy to my work." Raphael was silent for a moment, and Teresa could see something shifting in his expression. He then asked several complex technical questions about system architecture, performance issues, data security. Julia answered them all with confidence and clarity, demonstrating not just theoretical knowledge, but practical experience. Raphael challenged her with difficult hypothetical scenarios, and she navigated each one with a combination of technical rigor and human sensitivity. After nearly an hour, Raphael closed the portfolio and looked directly at Julia. "Miss Stevens, welcome to Miles Tech. The job is yours." Julia felt tears burn her eyes. She tried to speak, but emotion was blocking her throat. Beside her, Teresa squeezed her hand, and when Julia looked at her grandmother, she saw that she too was crying silently. "Thank you," Julia finally managed to say. "I promise you won't regret it." Raphael smiled, and it was a genuine smile, not the corporate half-smile Julia had seen in photos of him online. "I'm sure I won't. My assistant will go over all the details about your start date, salary, and benefits. Welcome to the team." Julia stood up, still limping slightly, and shook his hand again. This time the handshake was warmer on both sides. As she started toward the door, Raphael spoke again. "Miss Stevens, could you give us a few minutes? I'd like to speak with your grandmother alone." Julia looked from Raphael to Teresa, confused but not worried. Her grandmother nodded calmly. "You can go, my child. It's all right." After Julia left and the door closed, Raphael was silent for a moment. He stood up and walked to the window, hands in his pockets, looking out at the city below. "Teresa," he began, his voice softer than it had been throughout the interview. "Last week, when you came here, something changed in me. Not just the decision to interview your granddaughter, but something deeper." He turned to face her. "You reminded me of things I had buried. You reminded me of my grandmother, yes, but you also reminded me of who I was before I became this." He gestured vaguely at the office, the expensive suit, everything that represented his success. "I built this company from scratch," Raphael continued. "I started with 2 computers in a rented garage and turned it into one of the biggest tech companies in the country. I have 400 employees, offices in 5 cities, multi-million-dollar contracts. And you know what I gained in the process?" He paused, his voice turning bitter. "Fear, respect, based on terror. People who agree with me because they're afraid to disagree. A team that sees me as a boss, not a leader. And a loneliness that no amount of financial success can fill." Teresa listened in silence, knowing that sometimes people just need someone to listen without judgment. "I lost my humanity along the way," Raphael admitted, "and the worst part is I didn't even notice. When it happened, it was gradual, every small, cruel decision justified by efficiency, every relationship sacrificed on the altar of productivity." He sat down again, and for the first time since Teresa had met him, he looked vulnerable, almost fragile. "I need help," he said simply, "and I think you're the right person to help me." Teresa tilted her head. "What exactly do you need, Raphael? May I call you Raphael?" He nodded. "Please." "Raphael," she said, "you already have business consultants, tech experts, lawyers. What could an old woman like me offer that you don't already have?" Raphael smiled. But it was a sad smile. "Exactly what's missing. Humanity. Truth. A perspective that isn't interested in impressing or flattering me. Someone who sees me as a person, not a CEO." He leaned forward. "Teresa, I'd like to offer you a job. Nothing technical, nothing that requires tech knowledge. I want you to be my humanity consultant." Teresa blinked, completely taken aback. "Consultant of what?" Raphael gestured as he explained. "I want you to come here a few times a week, observe the company, talk to the employees, see how people really feel, and then give me honest feedback. No filters, no corporate politics, just the unvarnished truth about what's working and what isn't, about how I'm failing my team, about how I can reconnect with the humanity I've lost." Teresa was silent for a long moment. This was completely unexpected. Absurd, even. She had no formal qualifications, no college degree, had never worked in an office. "Raphael, I don't know if I'm the right person. I'm just an old woman who raised her daughters as best she could. I have no training for this." "Exactly," Raphael replied. "You have something far more valuable than training. You have wisdom. You have life experience. You have the ability to see what really matters, and most importantly, you're not afraid to confront me. You proved that when you first walked in here." He paused. "I'm prepared to pay a fair salary. Nothing that will make you a millionaire, but enough for you to work with dignity, and you would have complete freedom to speak your mind. That is the one non-negotiable condition. If I offer you this, you must promise to be brutally honest with me, even when the truth hurts, especially when the truth hurts." Teresa looked at the powerful man sitting before her, and she saw beyond the expensive suit and the luxury office. She saw a boy who grew up without his parents, raised by a loving grandmother who achieved incredible success but paid a terrible price for it. She saw someone who was reaching out for help, and Teresa was never able to ignore a plea for help. "I accept," she said, "but on one condition of my own." Raphael raised his eyebrows. "Which is?" "You have to be truly willing to listen, not just with your ears but with your heart, because if I accept this, I'm going to tell you truths you may not want to hear. I'm going to question you, I'm going to challenge you, and it's going to be uncomfortable. Are you prepared for that?" Raphael extended his hand. "I am, more prepared than I've ever been." Teresa shook his hand, sealing a deal that would change both of their lives in ways neither of them could predict. 3 weeks later, Teresa knew Miles Tech in a way no employee did. She didn't have her own office, just a desk in a quiet corner of the main floor, but that was intentional. She wanted to be where the people were, to observe, to listen, to feel the energy of the place, and what she felt left her deeply disturbed. The environment was too quiet. It wasn't the productive quiet of people focused on their tasks. It was the heavy silence of people afraid to make noise. Employees hurried through the hallways, heads down, avoiding eye contact. Conversations were whispered. Laughter was rare. And whenever Raphael appeared, it was as if a wave of ice swept through the room. Teresa began talking to people. At first, the interactions were brief and superficial. A "good morning here," a "how are you there?" But gradually, as employees realized that this kind elderly woman genuinely cared, they began to open up. That's how she met Marianne, the 28-year-old administrative assistant. They met in the break room during lunch. Marianne was alone eating a sandwich while looking at her phone. "May I sit here?" Teresa asked gently. Marianne looked up and nodded, surprised that anyone wanted her company. "How long have you worked here?" Teresa asked as she opened her own packed lunch. 4 years, Marianne replied. "I started as an intern and was promoted twice." "That's wonderful," Teresa smiled. "You must be very good at what you do." Marianne shrugged. "I used to think so." There was something in the way she said it that made Teresa pause. "Used to? What changed?" Marianne was silent for a moment, as if deciding if she could trust this woman. Then the words started to flow. 2 years ago, I had an idea to improve our customer service system. It was simple, but I thought it could make a difference. So I presented it to my supervisor in a meeting. She paused, her face tightening with the memory. "He humiliated me, in front of everyone. Said assistants weren't paid to think, only to execute. That I should focus on my job and leave the ideas to qualified people. Since then, I've never suggested anything again. I just do what I'm told and go home." Teresa felt anger boil inside her, but she kept her voice calm. "And did you tell anyone about this, Mr. Miles?" Marianne let out a bitter laugh. "Tell Mr. Miles?" "Teresa, with all due respect, Mr. Miles is part of the problem. He created this culture. Everyone here knows that if you make a mistake, you're finished. If you look weak, you're finished. If you don't produce like a machine, you're finished. We don't come to work here because we love it. We come because the salary is good and the company name looks good on a resume. But no one, and I mean no one, is genuinely happy here." Teresa absorbed every word, her heart growing heavier with each revelation. She asked more questions but didn't push too hard. She just listened. And when Marianne finally left, Teresa was alone in the break room, thinking about everything she had heard. In the following days, she talked to more people. To Richard, a 22-year-old junior developer who made a mistake in some code and hid it for 3 days, terrified of being fired, until the mistake became a bigger problem and he nearly had a panic attack. To Francesca, a 35-year-old project manager, who worked until 10 at night every day and hadn't seen her children awake in weeks. To Paul, an analyst who hid the birth of his daughter because he was afraid he would seem less committed to his job if he took paternity leave. Each story was a stab to Teresa's heart, and each one confirmed what she already suspected. Miles Tech was a gilded cage, and Raphael was the warden even without realizing it. When she finally sat in Raphael's office for their weekly report, he greeted her with a smile. "So, Teresa, how is your experience going? Are you enjoying the work?" Teresa didn't smile back. "Raphael, we need to talk. Seriously." He noticed the change in her tone and sat up straighter in his chair. "What happened?" "Your team is dying inside," she said directly. Raphael blinked. "What do you mean?" Teresa leaned forward. "They're afraid of you, afraid of making mistakes, afraid of looking weak, afraid of being human. You've created an environment where people come to work and leave their humanity at the door, and it's destroying them, slowly but surely." Raphael tensed. "Teresa, with all due respect, my team is highly productive. We have the best numbers in the industry." "Numbers," Teresa repeated. "You're measuring people in numbers. But what about their satisfaction, their mental health, their joy? When was the last time you saw someone genuinely laugh around here?" Raphael opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. He couldn't remember. "Exactly," Teresa said. Raphael ran a hand over his face. "Okay, so what do you suggest?" Teresa took a deep breath. "Call a general meeting, all employees, and do just one thing. Listen. Don't explain, don't justify, don't defend yourself. Just listen to what they have to say, and assure them there will be no reprisals no matter what they say." Raphael looked skeptical. "They'll never speak openly, not if I'm there." "Then you need to show vulnerability first," Teresa suggested. "You need to admit you don't have all the answers, that you want to do better, that you need their help. Show them you're human, too." Raphael was silent for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. "All right, I'll do it, but you stay by my side." "Always," Teresa promised. The meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon. When all 400 employees gathered in the company auditorium, the tension was palpable. They whispered among themselves, speculating about the reason for the unexpected summons. Mass layoffs? Restructuring? No one knew. Raphael took the stage, with Teresa by his side, and the room fell silent. "Good afternoon, everyone," Raphael began, his voice echoing through the sound system. "I know meetings like this usually bring bad news, but that's not the case today. No one is being fired, no drastic changes are coming." He paused, visibly nervous. "I've called you all here because I need to admit something. I have failed you." The room became so quiet you could hear a pin drop. "For the past few weeks, Teresa, whom many of you have met, has been my humanity consultant. She has been talking with you, observing our culture, and she brought me a report that left me ashamed." He took a deep breath. "You are afraid. Afraid of making mistakes, afraid of showing weakness, afraid of being human. And that is my fault. I created this environment. I set this tone. And today, I am here to apologize and to listen." The room remained silent. No one moved. "I'm not going to speak anymore," Raphael continued. "This meeting is yours. I want to hear what you have to say. Your frustrations, your pains, your suggestions, everything. And I promise in front of everyone here that there will be no reprisals. You can speak freely. Please." The silence stretched for more than a minute. 2 minutes. It was so uncomfortable that several people began to shift in their seats. Raphael was about to speak again when a voice rose from the middle of the audience. Marianne was on her feet, trembling visibly, but with determination on her face. "I have something to say." All heads turned to her. "Please," Raphael said gently. Marianne took a deep breath. I've worked here for 4 years, and 2 years ago, I stopped giving ideas because I was humiliated for it. I was treated as if I was stupid for trying to contribute. And since then, I've come to work every day doing the bare minimum, afraid to stand out, afraid to speak, afraid to be myself. Her voice broke. I used to love working here, but now I just count the days until the end of the workday. Raphael was pale. Marianne, I am so sorry. I didn't know. The dam had broken. Another employee stood up. Richard, the junior developer. I made a mistake 3 months ago, a simple coding error, but I was so terrified of being fired that I hid it for 3 days. And in those 3 days, I didn't sleep. I barely ate. I almost had a panic attack. When I finally confessed, my supervisor looked at me with such contempt that I wanted to disappear. More hands began to rise. Francesca stood up. I work until 10 at night almost every day. My kids don't ask when I'm coming home early anymore. My husband doesn't suggest we go out on the weekend anymore. I'm exhausted, empty, and I feel guilty for complaining because the salary is good. But money doesn't replace being alive, and I haven't felt alive in a very long time. Paul was next. I had a daughter 6 months ago, and I didn't tell anyone here. I hid the photos on my phone when I was at work. I didn't take my full paternity leave because I was afraid of seeming less dedicated. I missed the first few months of my daughter's life because I was afraid of losing this job. For over an hour, employees shared their stories. Some cried, others spoke with anger, but they all shared the same essence: fear, exhaustion, and the feeling that they were not seen as people, only as resources. Raphael listened to it all, and Teresa could see tears streaming down his face. He didn't try to hide them. He didn't try to defend himself. He just listened. When finally no one else had anything to say, he stood in silence for a long moment. Then he took the stage again. I have no words, he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. There is no excuse for what you have been through. For the environment I created, I was so focused on numbers, on success, on being the best, that I forgot you are people. People with families, with dreams, with fears, with lives outside of here. And I stole that from you. He wiped his eyes. I can't change the past, but I promise you that I will change the future. We will completely restructure our culture. We will implement wellness programs. We will create safe spaces for mistakes. We will celebrate humanity, not just productivity. And if I start to slip back into the old Raphael, I give all of you permission to call me out. Because I don't want to be the leader you fear. I want to be a leader you respect, because I respect you first. The room erupted in applause. It wasn't polite, obligatory applause. It was genuine applause, filled with emotion and hope. As people began to leave, many stopped to thank Raphael. Some even hugged him. And he returned every hug, every handshake, every word. Teresa watched it all with tears in her eyes, knowing she had witnessed the beginning of something transformative. 2 months had passed since that transformative meeting, and Miles Tech was unrecognizable. The once silent hallways now echoed with lively conversations and genuine laughter. The break room, once a place where people ate quickly and alone, had become a gathering spot where teams shared ideas and stories. Raphael had implemented drastic changes, flexible hours, so parents could take their children to school. Fridays, with a 3 o'clock dismissal. Monthly free therapy sessions for all employees. A mentorship program where mistakes were treated as learning opportunities, not reasons for punishment. And most importantly, he himself had changed. He walked the floors talking to people, asking about their lives, remembering the names of their children and spouses. He laughed more. He smiled more. He was more human. The results were undeniable. Julia's team, which she now led after a meteoric promotion, had increased its productivity by 40%. But it wasn't productivity born of fear. It was productivity born of genuine engagement. People wanted to be there. They wanted to contribute. They wanted to be part of something bigger. The turnover rate, which had been 30% a year, had dropped to 5%. And in internal satisfaction surveys, The company had jumped from a 3.2 to an 8.7 on a scale of 10. Teresa watched all of this with maternal pride. She saw Raphael transforming before her eyes, rediscovering the humanity he had lost along the way. She saw Julia flourishing as a leader, applying the same principles of empathy she had learned from her grandmother. It was more than she could have ever dreamed, but not everyone was happy with the changes. On a Thursday morning, Raphael was summoned to an emergency meeting of the Board of Investors. When he entered the conference room on the top floor of the building, he immediately felt the hostility in the air. The 5 board members were seated around the mahogany table, all with serious expressions and piles of documents in front of them. In the center, chairing the meeting, was Augustus Thorne, a 60-year-old man with perfectly coiffed gray hair and a suit that probably cost more than an average employee's car. He was the chairman of the board and the company's largest single investor, and he did not look happy. "Raphael, thank you for coming on such short notice," Augustus said, his voice dripping with false courtesy. "Please, have a seat." Raphael sat at the opposite end of the table, feeling like a defendant in the dock. "What's going on?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. "What's going on?" Augustus replied, putting on his reading glasses, "is that we are extremely concerned about the direction you are taking this company." He opened a folder and began to read numbers. "Your new wellness programs have cost $2 million in the last 2 months. The therapy sessions, the flexible hours that resulted in the need to hire more staff, the renovations of the common areas, all of this has a cost, and our quarterly profits are down 3%. Raphael leaned forward. "Yes, but productivity has increased dramatically. Employee satisfaction has skyrocketed. Our talent retention is better than ever. We are building long-term sustainability." "Sustainability," another board member, a younger man named Marcus, interjected, "doesn't pay dividends now. Our investors want a return, Raphael. They didn't invest millions in this company to fund an emotional support group. They invested to make a profit." Raphael felt his frustration mounting. "And they will profit, but not at the expense of our employees' mental and physical health. You're only seeing numbers on a spreadsheet. You're not seeing the people behind those numbers." Augustus slammed his hand on the table, making everyone jump. "It's exactly that kind of emotional thinking that concerns us, Raphael. You're getting soft. Ever since you hired that old woman, you've turned your back on everything that built this company. Toughness, uncompromising excellence, results above all else." "Teresa," Raphael said, his voice dangerously low. "Her name is Teresa, and she didn't make me turn my back on anything. She helped me rediscover something I had lost, something you all clearly never had to begin with: humanity." The room grew cold. Augustus slowly took off his glasses. "Watch your words, Raphael. I'll remind you that we own 51% of this company. You work for us, and if we're not satisfied with your performance, we have every right to replace you." Raphael felt his blood run cold. "Are you threatening me?" "We're giving you an ultimatum," Augustus corrected. "You have 3 months to reverse these ridiculous changes. Cut the wellness programs. Go back to the old management model. Recover that 3% profit, or we will find someone who can." Raphael stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly on the floor. "You want me to destroy everything we've built in the last 2 months? You want me to go back to being the boss everyone feared? You want me to choose between profit and people?" "Exactly," Marcus confirmed, "and we want your answer by the end of the quarter." Raphael looked at each of them one by one. He saw greed in their eyes. He saw coldness. He saw everything he was trying to leave behind. Without another word, he left the room, slamming the door behind him. In the elevator on the way down, he leaned his head against the cool wall, feeling the weight of it all crashing down on him. How could he choose? The company was his life. He had built it from nothing, but now, for the first time, it meant something more than just success. It meant hope for hundreds of people. When he reached his office, Teresa was already there, waiting. She had seen the meeting summons and knew it wasn't a good sign. The look on Raphael's face when he entered confirmed her worst fears. "They want me to reverse everything," he said, collapsing heavily into his chair. "They want me to go back to what I was, and if I don't, they'll remove me from the company." Teresa was silent for a moment. Then calmly she asked, And what do you want to do? Raphael let out a bitter laugh. What I want doesn't matter. It's about what I can do. If I lose the company, all of this disappears anyway, at least if I stay in control. I can try to keep some of the changes. Do you believe that? Teresa asked. He didn't answer. She leaned forward. Raphael, a year ago, you told me about your grandmother, about how she would have done anything for you. He nodded, confused about where she was going with this. But what do you think she would value more? Teresa continued. The success you achieved or the man you've become? Raphael opened his mouth to answer, but the words wouldn't come, because he knew the answer. His grandmother always said that character mattered more than accomplishments, that kindness was worth more than money, that at the end of your life what you take with you are the lives you've touched, not the things you've accumulated. Would she be proud of me if I gave up? He asked, his voice small. Teresa shook her head. She would be proud of you if you stood up for what's right, no matter the cost. It was at that moment that Julia burst into the office, without knocking. Uncle Raphael, she said, using the affectionate nickname she had adopted, you need to hear this. A client just signed a contract with us. Huge contract. And do you know why they chose Miles Tech over the competition? She was out of breath with excitement. Why? Raphael asked. Because they visited our office last week, Julia explained, and their CEO told me literally that our team looked genuinely happy, that he could feel the positive energy, that he wanted to work with a company that clearly values its people, because companies like that produce better work. He said our competitors might have cheaper proposals, but he'd rather pay more for quality and for working with people who actually care. The contract is for $5 million a year. Raphael was speechless. Julia continued, more serious now. Grandma told me about the ultimatum, and I came to tell you that everyone downstairs is talking about it. The news leaked, and the entire team is on your side. They're saying that if you get fired for defending them, they'll follow you. They'll leave the company and start something new with you. Raphael looked from Julia to Teresa. Do you know what you're asking? Starting from scratch would mean losing everything. Not everything, Teresa said softly. You wouldn't lose your character. You wouldn't lose the respect of these people. You wouldn't lose yourself again, and those things are worth infinitely more than any company. Raphael was silent for a long moment. Then something in his expression changed. Doubt gave way to determination. Uncertainty gave way to clarity. He stood up and went to the window, looking out at the city below. Call an extraordinary board meeting, he said. Julia, her face lit up, ran out to organize it. Teresa stayed behind. You know what you're going to do? She asked. Raphael turned, and there was fire in his eyes. I'm going to show them that humanity isn't a weakness. It's a strength. And I'm going to prove that doing the right thing is always more profitable in the long run. And if they can't see that, then they don't deserve to be in this company. The meeting was set for the next day. Raphael spent the entire night preparing his presentation, compiling data, preparing arguments. When he entered the meeting room the next morning, the board was already there, along with a few minor shareholders who had been summoned. Augustus greeted him with a condescending smile. I hope you've come to tell us you're going to reverse your hasty decisions. Raphael placed his folder on the table and connected his laptop to the projector. Actually, I've come to present data that proves you are completely wrong. He began his presentation. First, he showed the productivity numbers, a 40% increase in some teams, a 15% increase overall. Then he showed the turnover rate, from 30 to 5%. Do you know how much it costs to train a new employee? He asked. On average, 3 months' salary. With a 30% turnover rate among 400 employees, we were losing millions every year just replacing people who left because they were miserable here. He continued, relentless. He showed customer satisfaction surveys all improving. He showed the new contract Julia had secured, specifically because the company culture had impressed the client. He showed 5-year projections, demonstrating that with better retention and increased productivity, profits would soar far beyond the 3% they had temporarily lost. And then he did something no one expected. He showed his own life. Photos from 2 years ago where he looked tired, aged, empty, and photos from now where he was smiling, alive. I was building an empire, he said, but losing my soul in the process. Do you want a productive CEO, or do you want a CEO who will work himself and everyone around him into the ground, because I can no longer be the second option? The room was silent. Raphael turned off the projector and faced Augustus directly. So here is my counter-proposal. I stay and we keep all the changes. I'll give you 6 months to see the full results. If at the end of that period the numbers don't justify the investment, I will reverse everything myself. But if the numbers prove I'm right, you stop questioning me and let me lead the way I know is right. And if you don't agree to that, then here is my resignation. He placed an envelope on the table. Because I will no longer choose profit over people. I will no longer sacrifice humanity on the altar of efficiency. And if you want a CEO who will do that, then you'll have to find another one. The silence was deafening. Augustus looked at the envelope, then at Raphael, then at the data still on the screen. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and took off his glasses. You're betting everything on this. I am, Raphael confirmed, because for the first time in my life, I'm betting on the right thing. Augustus was silent for another long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, he started to laugh. It was a low, almost melancholic laugh. You know, Raphael, he said, I've built 3 companies in my life, and all 3 were exactly as you describe. Places where people were afraid, where profit was everything. And you know what happened? 2 of them went bankrupt because we couldn't retain talent. The 3rd survives, but it's an empty shell. He looked around the table. Maybe it's time we tried something different. He extended his hand to vote. All in favor of giving Raphael the 6 months he's asking for. Slowly, one by one, every hand around the table went up. It was unanimous. 1 year later, Teresa woke up in a hospital bed. The white light from the ceiling momentarily blinded her, and it took a few seconds for her to remember where she was and why. Her body felt heavy, tired in a way she had never experienced before. It wasn't the normal fatigue of a day's work, it was something deeper, as if every cell in her body was crying out for rest. The door opened and a nurse came in, followed quickly by Julia and Raphael. "Grandma!" Julia rushed to the bed, gently taking her grandmother's hand. "How are you feeling?" Teresa tried to smile, but even that seemed to require too much effort. "Tired, my child. Very tired." The doctor had been clear. Severe exhaustion and high blood pressure. Teresa had collapsed at the office 3 days earlier, scaring everyone deeply. Now, after tests and observation, the diagnosis was that she needed complete rest. A lot of rest. Raphael stood by the bed, his face etched with worry and guilt. "Teresa, this is my fault. I let you work too much. I should have noticed." Teresa shook her head weakly. "No, Raphael, this isn't your fault. It's just my body reminding me that I'm 69 years old and can't do everything I used to." In the following days, as she recovered in the hospital, Teresa had a lot of time to think. Julia visited her every day after work, sharing stories about the company, her team, the projects they were developing. Raphael came in the morning before, heading to the office, bringing fresh flowers and quiet conversation. And Teresa watched these two, so different yet united by the same philosophy of life, and felt her heart fill with something she took a while to recognize. It was fulfillment. On a rainy afternoon when only Raphael was present, Teresa finally put into words what she had been thinking. "Raphael, do you remember when you asked me about my life, about how I survived everything?" He nodded, pulling his chair closer to the bed. "You told me it was by choosing love over bitterness every single day." "Exactly," Teresa confirmed. "But what I didn't tell you is that there were days when that choice felt impossible, days when I wanted to give up, days when the loneliness and exhaustion were so great that I wondered if it was worth fighting anymore." She looked out the window at the falling rain. "When my husband left me, I had 3 little girls and no professional skills. I could have chosen to be a victim. I could have let bitterness consume me. And believe me, the temptation was always there. But then I would look at those 3 little girls and realize they were watching me, learning from me. And I didn't want them to learn that life knocks you down and you stay down. I wanted them to learn that life defeats you and you get back up. Raphael was absorbing every word. So how did you find the strength? Teresa smiled. I didn't find it. I created it. Every day I chose to believe I had strength, even when I didn't. And eventually, that choice became real. Every small victory gave me a little more courage for the next battle. And you know what I discovered? That purpose is the best medicine for pain. When you're living for something bigger than yourself, suffering becomes bearable. She held Raphael's hand. When I first walked into your office, I was fighting for Julia. But what I found was my own renewed purpose. For the first time in decades, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. I was making a difference, and that, Raphael, that was worth every moment of exhaustion. Tears streamed down Raphael's face. You gave me a second chance at being human, he whispered. How can I ever thank you for that? You're already thanking me, Teresa replied. Every day, you choose to lead with humanity instead of fear. Every day you see your employees as people instead of resources. You're honoring not just me, but your own grandmother. You're being the man she always knew you could be. After 2 weeks, Teresa was discharged from the hospital with strict instructions to slow down. She returned home to Lincoln Park, to the modest 2-story house where it all began. Julia took time off work to care for her, and in the quiet days that followed, grandmother and granddaughter talked about everything. About the past, about the future, about life and its mysteries. One afternoon, Julia asked a question she had been holding on to for a long time. Grandma, are you afraid? Afraid of what, my child? Of leaving. Of not being here anymore. Teresa was silent for a moment, thinking carefully about her answer. You know, Julia, I used to be afraid of that. Especially when your aunts were little, and I feared leaving them alone. But now I'm not afraid of leaving. What I'm afraid of is not having lived enough. And I'm not talking about years, I'm talking about quality, about presence, about connection. She took her granddaughter's hand. I could live to be 100 and not have lived at all if those years were empty. Or I could live until tomorrow and have lived completely if every moment was full of purpose and love. Life isn't measured in heartbeats. It's measured in moments that take your breath away. Julia cried, hugging her grandmother. You're the wisest person I know. Teresa chuckled softly. I'm not wise, my child. I'm just old. And when you live long enough and pay attention, life teaches you everything you need to know. It was during these weeks of recovery that Raphael had an idea. He showed up one morning with a special sparkle in his eyes. Teresa, he began, excited, I've been contacted by other CEOs. They've heard about the transformation at Miles Tech and want to know how we did it. They want to learn. Teresa smiled. And what did you tell them? That I didn't do it. You did. And they want to meet you. They want to learn from you. And so, the Conversations was born, a unique mentorship program where Teresa taught business leaders how to be human in power. Once a week, a small group would gather in a simple room at Miles Tech. There was no sophisticated technology, no PowerPoint presentations, just chairs in a circle, coffee, and Teresa sharing her wisdom. She spoke about choosing love over bitterness, about leading with the heart without losing your head, about seeing people as people, not numbers, about building legacies that matter. The leaders who participated left transformed. Companies began to change their cultures, and the ripple effect was undeniable. On her 70th birthday, Teresa sat in her favorite chair in the 2-story house, an old notebook in her lap. It was her journal, where she had written since she was young. She opened it to a blank page and began to write. Today I turn 70. 7 decades of life, each one filled with struggles, tears, joys, and surprises. If someone had told me a year ago that I would walk into the office of a millionaire CEO and change not only his life, but the lives of hundreds of people, I would have laughed. But life has its mysterious ways. She continued writing, the words flowing easily. I used to think my legacy would be my daughters. And they are, but I've discovered that legacy isn't just what you leave for the people you love. It's what you leave in the people you touch. Every employee at Miles Tech who now goes to work happy, every CEO who learns to lead with humanity, every person who chooses love over fear because they heard my story. That is my true legacy. And it continues, not through me but through Raphael, through Julia, through Marianne, through Richard, through everyone I've touched, who now touches others. It's like throwing a stone into a lake. The ripples keep expanding long after the stone has sunk. She closed the notebook and looked around the small living room. Nothing had changed physically. It was the same simple house where she had raised her daughters. But everything felt different now, because she was different. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving or fighting. She was living fully. The following month, Miles Tech celebrated 2 years of transformation. The numbers were unquestionable. Productivity had increased by 55%. Profits had grown by 23%. Turnover remained below 5%. And the company had been voted for the 3rd consecutive time as the best place to work in tech in the country. At the celebration party, Raphael gave a speech. He looked around the room full of employees, all smiling, talking, celebrating together. 2 years ago, he began, I would have said that the success of this company was measured in closed contracts and quarterly profits. And those numbers are important, I won't lie. But today I know that true success is measured differently. He pointed to the room. It's measured in the laughter I hear every day. In the people who stop me in the hall to share good news about their families. In the employees who say, they love coming to work. That is real success. And I owe it all to one extraordinary woman who walked into my office one day and reminded me of what I had forgotten, that we are humans first, professionals second. Teresa, who was sitting next to Julia, stood up as Raphael asked. The entire room erupted in applause, a long and sincere ovation. Raphael came down from the small stage and hugged Teresa. Thank you, he whispered in her ear, for everything, for saving me from myself. Teresa pulled back and held his face in both her hands. You didn't need to be saved, Raphael. You just needed to be reminded, and now you're reminding others. That's the legacy continuing. That night, when everyone had gone home and the office was quiet, Raphael stood alone in his office. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. His father answered after a few rings. Raphael? Is that you? Yeah, Dad, Raphael replied, his voice thick with emotion. I just wanted to call and say that I understand now. I understand why you and Mom worked so hard. You were trying to give us a better life, and I'm grateful. But I've also learned that there are ways to pursue success without losing yourself in the process, and I wanted you to know that I've found that balance, and that Grandma would be proud. There was silence on the other end, then the sound of choked-back sobs. She would be, son, she would be very proud. Months later, Teresa was sitting in her small backyard garden. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves of the mango tree she had planted herself decades ago. Julia was sitting beside her working on a laptop. Grandma, Julia said suddenly, I've been invited to give a keynote speech on human-centered leadership at the biggest tech conference in the country. Teresa smiled. And are you going to accept? Julia looked at her grandmother. Only if you come with me. I want to tell our story. How it all started with a brave grandmother who crossed the city to fight for her granddaughter. Teresa felt tears of joy. It would be an honor, my child. As the sun set over Chicago, painting the sky orange and pink, Teresa reflected on her journey. From an abandoned woman raising 3 daughters alone to a mentor transforming leaders, from a survivor to an inspiration. And she realized that her life, with all its pain and struggles, had been exactly what it needed to be to prepare her for this moment. True success, she thought, is not in never falling. It's in getting up every time you fall and helping others get up too. It's in turning your pain into purpose, your struggle into wisdom, your suffering into compassion. And when you do that, when you live not just for yourself, but to lift others up, then you leave the kind of legacy that transcends generations. A legacy not of money or power, but of love, courage, and humanity. And that legacy, she smiled to herself, that legacy lives forever.